Before you hear this story, understand something. This is not a fairy tale. This is what happens when hunger makes parents dangerous. You were told this story as a child so you wouldn't be afraid. It was read softly, wrapped in comfort, and given a happy ending so you could sleep. But that was never why this story was created. The original version wasn't meant to comfort anyone. It was meant to prepare you. When this story was first told, people weren't afraid of monsters. They were afraid of hunger. They were afraid of winter, empty fields, and children crying at night because there was nothing left to give them. This story came from a time when entire villages disappeared, from parents who counted crumbs, from mothers and fathers who understood a truth we try very hard to forget. Love does not create food, so let me ask you something. If there isn't enough food for your children, and you know that in a week everyone will be dead, what do you do? Which ones do you save? Which ones do you let die? This story has an answer, not a comforting one, not a moral one, a real one. This is not a story about clever children. It is not a story about stranger danger. And it is not really about a witch. It is a story about starvation, about parents who do the math, about children who learn far too early that survival and innocence cannot always exist together. This story was changed because the truth was too sharp. They removed the hunger. They softened the parents. They made the monster easier to recognize, but the original version never let you look away. It says that sometimes parents abandon their children. Sometimes survival demands terrible choices. And sometimes children survive anyway. But they are never the same. This is the story they changed. And once you hear it this way, you will never hear it the same again. Settle back, lower the volume of the world. Let the dark press closer than feels comfortable. Breathe in, hold it, now let it go. Because what you are about to hear is not a fairy tale. It only pretends to be one. This is a story that has been dressed up, softened, and tucked into bed beside sleeping children for centuries. Not because it was harmless, but because the truth underneath it was too dangerous to tell out loud. Tonight we strip that protection away. You already think you know this story. Two children, a forest, a house made of candy, a wicked witch, a clever escape. A happy ending. That version exists to comfort you. The original existed to warn you, and warnings are never gentle. Long before this story was printed in books, long before it was animated, sung, or read under soft blankets, it was told by people who had watched their neighbors starve, by women who had buried children with empty stomachs, by parents who understood, truly understood, that love does not defeat hunger. The first version of this story wasn't told to entertain children. It was told to prepare them. Because famine does something to people. It doesn't just empty the belly, it hollows out morality. It erodes empathy. It forces choices no human being should ever have to make. And sometimes those choices involve children. Let me ask you something before we continue. If your family was starving, if there was not enough food for everyone, if you knew that in a week everyone would be dead, what would you do? Don't answer too quickly. Because the parents in this story didn't either. Their names were Hansel and Gretel, not softened, not anglicized, not safe. Their names sounded rough in the mouth, like the world they were born into. And their story begins the same way many real ones did, with a family counting crumbs. At the edge of an ancient forest, the kind that swallows sound and never quite gives it back, lived a woodcutter, his wife, and their two children. The house was small, barely standing, held together by desperation and habit. The woodcutter worked every day, not because it paid well, but because it paid anything at all. He loved his children. That part is important. Because what comes next is not about hatred, it's about hunger. When the famine arrived, it did not come like a storm. It seeped in quietly, crops failed. Livestock thinned, markets emptied, then people did. Entire villages faded into memory. Firewood stopped selling. Who buys warmth when food is a luxury? The forest itself became hostile, stripped bare by the desperate. Meals vanished one by one, until hunger became the family's constant companion. The children changed. Their cheeks sank. Their eyes grew too large. Their movements slowed, every step measured, every breath conserved. Gretel was 8. Hansel was just old enough to understand fear, old enough to see the looks. The looks parents give when they are doing math they don't want to do. The mother was not evil. That's the part later versions erase. She was practical, hardened by survival, able to make numbers add up when feelings refused to. And the numbers were unforgiving. 1 loaf of bread, 2 days, 4 mouths. After that, nothing. That night the children slept hungry. Their parents did not sleep at all. By the fire barely burning, the mother finally said the thing that had been stalking both of them for weeks. They're going to die anyway. No anger, no cruelty, just fact. The woodcutter didn't argue, he already knew. And when she said the word unless, his stomach turned to ice. Because somewhere deep inside he had already thought the same thing. And this is where the real horror begins, not with a witch, but with parents. The decision was made before dawn. That's how these things always happen, not in the heat of argument, not with shouting or violence, but quietly, coldly, in the hours when hunger feels sharpest and hope is weakest. Morning crept in through the cracks of the woodcutter's house like a thief, thin light, no warmth. The mother rose first. Her movements were efficient, controlled, as if she were performing a task she'd rehearsed 100 times in her mind. "Get up," she said, no tenderness, no hesitation. "We're going into the forest today. Your father needs help." Gretel rubbed sleep from her eyes, confused, still trusting. "But we've never—" "You're old enough now," the mother snapped. "Dress quickly." Hansel said nothing. He had not slept. He had spent the night staring at the dark ceiling, replaying every word he'd overheard, every syllable of his parents' conversation, every quiet agreement that sealed his fate. He knew exactly what today was. They dressed in the half-dark. The house felt different, smaller, like it was already letting them go. Hansel caught his father's eyes once. The man looked away immediately. That hurt more than anger ever could. The mother handed them each a piece of bread, tiny, dry, barely more than a gesture. "This is for later," she said. "Don't eat it before lunch." Hansel stared at the bread in his palm. This was the price of his life. This was the last thing his mother would ever give him. "Thank you, Mother," he said softly. Her head snapped up. For just a moment something flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone. They left as the sun climbed weakly into the sky. The father led the way, axe slung over his shoulder like a burden he could never put down. The mother walked behind the children, close enough that turning back was never an option. The forest swallowed them quickly. Trees closed in. Paths narrowed. The air grew colder, heavier, damp with rot and old secrets. Every few steps Hansel stopped. "What are you doing?" his father asked sharply. Hansel pointed back. "I'm looking at my white cat," he said. "She's sitting on the roof. I'm saying goodbye." The mother scoffed. "That's not a cat, you fool. That's the sun on the chimney." "Oh," Hansel said calmly, "my mistake." But it wasn't the sun he was watching. Each time he stopped, his hand slipped into his pocket. Each time a white pebble fell silently to the forest floor. One after another. A quiet rebellion, a fragile promise. They walked longer than ever before, past familiar trees, past the places the woodcutter usually worked. Then farther, the forest changed. The trees grew older, thicker. Their trunks twisted like frozen screams. The ground became uneven. The paths disappeared. This was the deep forest, the place people whispered about, the place children didn't return from. By mid-afternoon, they reached a clearing. "This is good," the father said hoarsely. His hands shook as he built the fire, too large, too fast, as if flame could burn away guilt. "You stay here," he said. "Rest, we'll go cut wood. We'll be back before dark." Lies, all of it. But Hansel nodded. The mother looked at them one last time. No tears, no goodbye, just resolve. Then they turned and walked into the trees. The forest closed behind them, and the sound of their footsteps faded. Silence rushed in. Not peaceful silence, the kind that presses on your ears until you're sure something terrible is about to happen. Gretel sat close to the fire. She ate her bread immediately, too hungry to save it. Hansel held his. Time passed. The fire burned down. The forest remained unnaturally quiet. "Where are they?" Gretel asked as shadows lengthened. "They'll be back," Hansel said. He was lying easily now. The words came without effort. Night fell, the fire died, the darkness wrapped around them completely. Gretel trembled. "Hansel, I'm scared." "I know," he whispered, "but wait." And then the moon rose, full, bright, cold. White light flooded the forest, and suddenly the ground glittered. The pebbles, each one shining like a tiny star, a trail, a way home. Hansel stood. "Come on," he said, taking Gretel's hand. "Follow me." "Where are we going?" "Home." They walked for hours, slow, weak, hungry, but the pebbles never failed them, one after another, leading them back through the darkness. When they reached the house just before dawn, the door was closed. Not locked, Hansel pushed it open. Inside, his father sat at the table, staring at nothing. When he looked up and saw them, his face drained of color. You're back." The mother appeared behind him. Shock flashed across her face, then anger, then something carefully blank. "What happened?" she demanded. "We fell asleep," Hansel said smoothly. "When we woke up it was dark. We thought you'd gotten lost." "They followed the trail back," he added simply. The father looked like he might collapse. Relief and shame warred across his face. The mother said nothing, but her eyes burned. They were home, alive for now, but famine does not forgive mistakes. Days passed, then more. The food vanished again. Hunger returned sharper than before, and one night as Hansel lay awake listening, he heard it. "We have to try again." His mother's voice, colder this time, more certain. "They found their way back," the father murmured weakly. "Not this time," she replied. "This time we go deeper." Deeper than before, deeper than memory. And Hansel understood something terrible. The forest was not finished with them. Hope is a fragile thing. It survives the first betrayal. Sometimes even the second. But it rarely survives certainty. That night, Hansel did not sleep. He lay rigid beneath the thin blanket, listening to his parents breathe on the other side of the room, listening to the small sounds of the house settling, listening for the moment the lie would become permanent. He already knew what was coming. The famine had not eased. The village was worse. More houses dark, more doors left open because there was no one left to close them. Hunger has a way of grinding resistance down to dust. His father's objections were weaker now, shorter, almost ceremonial. Guilt cannot feed you. Love cannot fill an empty stomach. And his mother knew it. "We'll take them farther," she said quietly, "so deep even we'll struggle to find our way back." Silence. Then the sound of agreement, not spoken but understood. Hansel closed his eyes. This time there would be no mercy. When the house finally fell quiet, he slipped from the bed. He moved with the precision of a child who has learned that mistakes cost lives. The floorboards creaked anyway. He froze, waited, nothing. He crept to the door, reached for the latch. It did not move, locked. His mother had learned. The realization hit him like a physical blow. No pebbles, no moonlit path, no second chances. He tried again. The latch was solid. Any force would wake them. Slowly he returned to the bed, lay down beside Gretel, and stared into the dark. They were going to die unless he found another way. Morning came too fast, before dawn. Before the world could even pretend to be kind. Up, the mother said. Her voice was sharper now, more impatient. We're going deep into the forest today. She handed them bread again, smaller pieces than before, barely crumbs. The loaf was nearly gone. Hansel turned the bread over in his fingers, hard, dry, everything they had left. And then an idea, a terrible one, a desperate one, but desperation breeds creativity. They left while the moon was still fading. The forest swallowed them quickly. Deeper, deeper still. Even Hansel began to lose his sense of direction. Every few steps he slowed. "What are you doing now?" his mother snapped. "I'm looking at my little dove," Hansel said. "She's sitting on the roof." "That's the sun," she said cruelly. "Keep moving." But he wasn't watching the sky. He was tearing his bread into tiny pieces, barely crumbs, letting them fall behind him. One by one, a breadcrumb trail, a gamble. A sacrifice. His only food for the chance to live. The forest here was different, older. The trees were enormous. Their branches knotted together overhead, choking out the light. The air was green and dim, smelled of mold and decay. This was not a place meant for people. This was a place that watched. At last, they reached another clearing. The father built a fire, bigger than before, as if size could make up for intent. "Stay here," he said. "We'll come back." He didn't wait for an answer. The mother gave one final warning. "Don't wander," she said. "If you do, we won't find you." Then they were gone. Again, this time Gretel didn't pretend. "They're not coming back," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "No," Hansel said. She nodded. No tears, only exhaustion. "But it's okay," Hansel added quickly. "I left a trail." She looked at him. "Breadcrumbs. You used your bread." "I had to. But now you have nothing." "We'll get home," he said. "We have to." They waited. Morning became afternoon. Afternoon became evening. The fire burned low. Their stomachs screamed. When the moon finally rose, Hansel stood. "Come on," he said. "Time to go home." They searched the ground. Nothing, no crumbs, not one. Hansel's breath caught. "Where are they?" Gretel whispered. Then they heard it, fluttering, soft, chirping, birds. Dozens of them, fat birds, well-fed birds. The breadcrumbs were gone, every single one. Something inside Hansel cracked, not loudly, quietly, like a bone snapping under too much weight. They were lost, truly lost. They walked anyway. What else was there to do? The forest never changed. Every direction looked the same. They walked through the night. Then the next day, then the next night, 3 days without real food, occasional berries. A mushroom they prayed wasn't poison, a trickle of water from a stream. By the third day, Hansel could barely stand. Gretel was worse. Her skin clung to her bones, her eyes were too large. "I can't," she whispered, collapsing against a tree. "Yes, you can," Hansel said, though his voice shook. "Just a little farther." "Where?" she asked weakly. "We don't know where we're going." She was right. They were probably walking in circles, but stopping meant death. He pulled her up. They staggered forward together. And then they heard singing. A bird, clear, beautiful, impossible. Hope flared again, weak, dangerous, but irresistible. They followed the sound. The bird was white, pure white, like moonlight made flesh. It led them through the trees, never far ahead, always waiting. And then the forest opened, and there it stood, a house, but not a real one. The walls were bread, thick and golden. The roof was cake, layered and frosted. The windows were sugar. A miracle, a lie. They stood frozen. "This isn't real," Gretel whispered. "It can't be." Hansel reached out, broke off a piece, bread, soft, fresh, real. He tasted it and almost cried. "It's real," he said. Gretel didn't wait, they ate. Like animals, like the starving, they didn't hear the door open, didn't notice the old woman. Not until her voice drifted out, "Nibble, nibble, little mouse," and the forest fell silent again. The voice didn't shout, it didn't threaten, it sang, soft, playful, almost affectionate. "Nibble, nibble, little mouse." The words drifted through the clearing like smoke. Hansel and Gretel froze. Bread hung half-eaten from their mouths. Sugar clung to their fingers. For the first time since the forest swallowed them, fear cut through hunger. "Who is nibbling at my house?" the voice asked again. Slow footsteps followed. Then she appeared, an old woman, bent nearly double, white hair hanging in thin ropes around a face carved deep with wrinkles. Her eyes were pale, cloudy, unfocused, almost blind. She leaned on a crooked crutch. Every step looked painful, harmless. That's how she was meant to look. That's how she always looked. "The wind," Hansel said quickly, the answer rising from some half-remembered rhyme. "The heaven-born wind." The old woman smiled. It was wide, too wide. "Poor children," she crooned, "so thin, so hungry." Her voice dripped with sympathy. "Come inside, dears. You don't need to eat the house. I have better food within." Hansel hesitated. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. Houses didn't grow from cake. Old women didn't live alone in famine and thrive. But instinct does not survive starvation. Hunger silences doubt, and she was offering food, so they followed her. Inside, the house changed. No bread walls, no sugar windows, just plain wood, simple furniture, clean, almost comforting. And a table covered in food, milk, pancakes thick with sugar, apples, nuts, more food than they had seen in months. "Sit," the woman said gently. "Eat." They didn't need to be told twice. They ate until their stomachs screamed, until pain replaced hunger, until their bodies, shocked by fullness, began to tremble. The old woman watched, not with joy, with calculation. "Good children," she murmured, "now you must sleep." She led them to a small room, 2 beds. Clean sheets, soft pillows, a luxury so overwhelming it felt unreal. "Sleep," she whispered. "You're safe here." They collapsed instantly. Their bodies shut down. They never saw her face change, never saw her eyes sharpen, never saw the hunger surface. "Got them," she whispered. She stood over them for a long time, studying, weighing, measuring like livestock. "The boy first," she decided. "More meat." She moved quickly then, too quickly for someone so old. Too strong. She dragged Hansel from the bed. He barely woke before the night air hit him, before the ground slammed into his back, before the door of the stable closed and locked. The cage smelled wrong, old straw, rust, rot. Hansel staggered to the door. "Let me out," he screamed. "Where's my sister?" The old woman's face appeared at the small barred window. No sweetness now, no pretending. "You'll stay there," she said flatly. "I'm going to fatten you up." Hansel stared at her. "You're going to eat you," she finished calmly. "I've been doing it for years," she smiled. "2 children at once is rare." The door shut, the lock clicked. Final, Gretel woke to shaking. "Get up," the woman snapped. Her voice was iron now. "Your brother needs feeding." "What?" Gretel gasped. "Where's Hansel?" "In the cage," the witch said, "until he's ready." Gretel's world tilted. "You can't." The witch grabbed her arm. Her grip was crushing. "I can do whatever I want," she hissed. "This is my house." Fear swallowed Gretel whole. She nodded. Good girl. The days became routine. A nightmare made ordinary. Gretel cooked rich food, cream, butter, heavy bread. She fed Hansel through the bars. "I'll think of something," she whispered. "I promise." But she didn't know how. Every morning the witch came. Stick out your finger, boy. She couldn't see well, so Hansel gave her a bone, a thin chicken bone he'd found on the floor. She squeezed it. Still too thin, she complained. What's wrong with you? Weeks passed, 4 of them, 4 weeks of waiting, of terror, of hunger wearing a different mask, and then one morning, I'm done waiting, the witch said. Today we cook. She turned to Gretel. Light the oven. The words didn't echo, they didn't need to. They landed inside Gretel's chest like a dropped stone and sank straight through her. Today we cook. The witch said it the way someone announces the weather. No excitement, no ceremony. Just inevitability. Gretel stood frozen, her hands slick with sweat, her mouth dry and useless. The cage was quiet, too quiet. Hansel hadn't screamed, not yet. Did you hear me? The witch snapped. Light the oven. The oven squatted against the wall like a mouth waiting to be fed. It was enormous, far larger than any oven Gretel had ever seen. Big enough for bread, big enough for meat, big enough for a child. Her stomach twisted. I don't know how, Gretel said, forcing her voice small, stupid, harmless. The witch's patience was gone now. You know enough, she snarled. Do it. Gretel moved, because fear moves you when nothing else can. She gathered wood, stacked it, struck the spark. The fire caught quickly, too quickly. Flames licked upward, bright and hungry. The heat grew fast, pressing against her skin, stealing the air from her lungs. The witch hovered close, eyes glittering. Hotter, she demanded. It must be very hot. Gretel fed the fire. The oven roared, the air shimmered. Sweat poured down her back. The witch peered inside, nodding. Yes, yes, almost perfect. She turned suddenly. Go in. Gretel blinked. What? Crawl inside, the witch said sharply. Check the back. Make sure it's hot enough. The words didn't make sense at first, then they did, and everything slowed. This was it. This was how it ended. If Gretel refused, the witch would force her. If she obeyed, she would burn alive. An 8-year-old girl cooked alongside her brother. Her heart thundered. Her mind raced. She had one chance, one moment. She had to be clever, like Hansel with the bone. I don't understand, Gretel said, tilting her head, making herself smaller. Dumber, how do I get in? The opening is too small. The witch snarled. Idiot child, she shoved Gretel aside. Watch, it's easy. She bent, put her head inside the oven just for a second. That was all Gretel needed. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think, she pushed. Every ounce of fear, every shred of desperation, every instinct screaming live. The witch shrieked. Her hands clawed at the oven's edge. Gretel shoved harder. The old woman's body tipped forward, and then she was inside. Gretel slammed the door, shoved the bolt home. Locked. The screaming began immediately, not words, just sound, high, animal, inhuman. The oven shook as fists pounded from within. Let me out, you little. I'll eat you alive. The smell came next, burning flesh, sweet and sickening, unmistakable. Gretel backed away, shaking violently. The screams rose, cracked, broke, became pleading, then sobbing, then silence. Only the fire remained. Crackling, consuming, Gretel slid to the floor, her whole body trembled. She had done it. She had killed someone, burned them alive. She was 8 years old, and she would never forget that sound. But there was no time, Hansel. She staggered to her feet and ran. The stable loomed. Her hands shook so badly she dropped the key twice. Finally the lock gave. The door creaked open. Light flooded the cage. Hansel blinked, staggered. What happened? He whispered. I heard screaming. Gretel swallowed. The witch is dead, she said. I killed her. He stared at her, really looked at her, and saw that his sister was not a child anymore. You saved us, he said. Gretel didn't answer. She didn't feel saved. She felt emptied. They searched the house. Food first, then supplies. In a hidden room behind a false wall they found the chests, 3 of them, heavy, locked. Hansel broke them open with the axe. Pearls spilled out, gems, gold, enough wealth to buy safety, enough blood to drown in. This belonged to the other children, Hansel said quietly. The ones who didn't escape. Gretel nodded. We take it anyway, she said. We have to. They filled their pockets, didn't look back at the oven, didn't bury the body. They left. The forest felt different now, quieter, as if it were watching them go. They walked until they reached water. Wide, dark, impassable, they stopped. Exhausted, defeated. Then a white duck appeared, bright-eyed, calm. One at a time, it said gently, and carried them across. They ran the rest of the way home, found their father waiting. Broken, crying, their mother was dead. The story never says how. Only that she was gone. They never starved again. They survived. They lived. But happiness, that's a word for people who don't know what survival costs. They did not celebrate. That part never makes it into the children's books. There was no laughter as they crossed the water, no triumphant music swelling in the background, no sense of victory, only exhaustion, only shock, only the strange, hollow quiet that follows something irreversible. The forest thinned as they walked, but neither of them noticed. They moved like sleepwalkers, like people who had left pieces of themselves behind and did not know how to retrieve them. The treasure weighed down their pockets, pearls knocking against bone, gold bruising their hips with every step, blood money. Neither of them said the words out loud, but they both felt it. By the time the familiar outline of their home appeared through the trees, the sun was already sinking. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Someone was alive, that alone felt unreal. They ran, not with joy, with urgency, with the desperate need to see something ordinary again. Their father sat outside on a stump, head buried in his hands, smaller than they remembered, older, hollowed out. When he looked up and saw them, his face emptied of color. For a moment he didn't move, as if afraid they were ghosts. Then he broke. He ran to them, sobbing openly, crushing them into his chest. "You're alive," he kept repeating. "You're alive." He shook like a man who had already buried them in his mind. Hansel felt the weight of that. The knowledge that his father had lived with their deaths every waking moment. That guilt had eaten him alive. "Where is she?" Hansel asked quietly. He already knew the answer, but some part of him needed to hear it. Their father stiffened, his arms loosened. "Dead," he said, one word heavy. "She died while you were gone." No details, no explanation. The story never gives one. Did hunger take her anyway? Did illness finish what starvation began? Did guilt rot her from the inside out? Or did something else happen in that house while the children were gone? The tale refuses to say. And that silence is deliberate. Some truths are left open because certainty would be worse. They went inside. The house was colder than before, barer, almost empty. Their father had been surviving on nothing, living because he didn't know how to die. Gretel reached into her pocket, slowly, deliberately. She poured the contents onto the table. Pearls rolled across rough wood. Gems caught the firelight. Gold coins clinked softly. Their father stared, speechless. "Where did you, the witch?" Hansel said. "She had it." Their father picked up a pearl, turned it in his fingers. "It's paid for with blood," he whispered. "All money is," Gretel replied. Her voice sounded wrong, too calm, too old. "At least this way," she continued, "we don't starve again." Their father looked at them then, really looked. At a boy who had spent weeks in a cage meant for animals. At a girl who had pushed someone into fire and listened until the screaming stopped. They had left children. They had returned survivors, and survivors are never the same. Life improved, materially. Food returned to the table. Warmth returned to the house. The famine eventually loosened its grip on the land. They repaired the roof. Bought clothes, bought safety. Their father never remarried. He never forgave himself. He tried to be gentle, tried to atone, but some debts cannot be paid. Hansel grew cautious, careful, uncomfortable in confined spaces. He slept lightly. Always listening, trust did not come easily anymore. Gretel grew harder, quieter. There was a sharpness in her now, a readiness. The part of her that had acted without hesitation never fully went away. It stayed, waiting. And so the story tells us they lived happily ever after. But what does that even mean? They lived, yes. They survived, yes. They were never hungry again. But happiness, that word belongs to people who have not heard someone burn alive, who have not been weighed like meat, who have not watched their parents choose numbers over love. The truth is simpler. They lived with what they did, with what was done to them, with the knowledge that survival is not clean, it is not moral, it is not kind, it is necessary. And that brings us to the real ending, not the one tied with ribbons, the one hidden underneath. This story is not about a witch, it never was. It is about poverty, it is about famine. It is about what happens when there is not enough. In medieval Europe, children were abandoned during famines. This was not rare. It was common enough to require laws. Churches accepted abandoned children. Cities built orphanages because the numbers were too high. Parents left children at forest edges hoping someone else might save them, or knowing no one would. The parents in this story are not monsters. That is the most uncomfortable truth of all. They are desperate people making an impossible choice. And the witch, an old woman who somehow survives famine while others starve. Ask yourself how. The story never explains. But it doesn't have to. This tale survived because it told the truth. The truth that desperation destroys morality, that hunger makes monsters of ordinary people, that children are not protected by the world simply because they are children, and that sometimes survival is the only victory left. If you've stayed this long, you've already figured it out. The witch is not the worst thing in this story, she's just the most obvious. She wears the mask we're comfortable with: crooked back, strange house, unnatural hunger. A monster we can point at and say, that is evil. But fairy tales were never written to point outward. They were written to warn about what lives inside us when the world collapses. And nothing reveals that faster than hunger. In the centuries when this story first circulated, famine was not rare. It was seasonal, predictable, relentless. Entire regions would starve at once. Fields failed, markets emptied, roads filled with bodies. And when food disappears, society peels back to something older, colder. Kinder words don't survive long on an empty stomach. Parents did abandon children. Not once, not occasionally, regularly. Children were left in forests, on church steps, outside city gates, sometimes with a note, sometimes without, not because they were unloved, but because parents knew something unbearable. Watching your child starve slowly is worse than letting them disappear quickly. That is the math no one wants to admit, and that is why this story existed. The mother in the original tale is not a stepmother. That was added later, because the truth was too sharp. A stepmother makes abandonment easy to digest. A birth mother makes it unbearable. The original version forces you to confront the possibility that love is not always stronger than survival. That even a parent can choose arithmetic over instinct. That sometimes morality bends until it breaks. The father protests, cries but still complies. Weakness does not absolve guilt. That too is part of the lesson. And then there is the witch, an old woman living alone in a famine. Ask yourself, how does she eat? How does she thrive when entire villages starve? The story never gives her a tragic origin. It doesn't need to. She is the end result of desperation taken too far. A person who crossed a line and never came back. Cannibalism during famines was real, documented, recorded. Punished when discovered, people ate the dead, then the dying, then the living, not monsters, people. The witch is not supernatural horror. She is historical horror. Her genius is not magic, it's understanding hunger. She builds her trap from food because starving children cannot resist food. Not caution, not fear, not logic. Survival overrides everything. The gingerbread house is not whimsical, it's predatory, a lure designed by someone who knows exactly how desperation works, and Hansel and Gretel walk into it willingly, because they must. Now consider Gretel. 8 years old, she does not scream, she does not faint, she acts, she tricks. She pushes, she kills. The story does not punish her, it does not reward her either. It simply allows her to live. That is radical. Because most stories do not allow children, especially girls, to be violent agents of their own survival. But this one does, and it refuses to comfort you afterward. There are no nightmares described, no guilt scenes, no therapy arc. Just silence, because in real trauma you don't always fall apart. Sometimes you just continue, changed. Then there is the treasure, the blood money, pearls, gold, gems. We like to imagine wealth as clean, earned, deserved. But most wealth historically is built on suffering. The story doesn't hide this. Hansel names it. This belonged to dead children, and they take it anyway. Why? Because refusing it would not bring anyone back. Because starving again would not honor the dead. Because survival does not allow moral purity. The children become like their mother in that moment, practical, cold, alive. And what about the mother's death? The story says nothing. Just that she died while the children were gone. That silence is not accidental. Did hunger kill her anyway? Did guilt? Did the father? The tale refuses to absolve him, refuses to condemn him outright. Because reality rarely gives us clean answers. Justice in famine is messy, random, often non-existent. And so we return to that final line, and they lived happily ever after, which is not a promise. It's a lie we repeat because the truth is harder. They lived. That is all the story guarantees. Happiness is left undefined, because happiness after survival is never simple. This is why fairy tales endure, not because they comfort, but because they tell us what we are capable of, what we might become, what we might do. They prepare us for a world that does not care how innocent we are, and that brings us to the final question, the one this story leaves hanging in the dark. If you were starving, if your child was starving, if survival demanded something unforgivable, what would you become? Every generation believes it is different, safer, smarter, more civilized. We tell ourselves that stories like this belong to the past, to medieval villages, to a world without supermarkets, welfare systems, or laws. We are wrong. The setting changes. The hunger does not. The forest never disappeared. It just learned how to disguise itself. Today, it looks like poverty lines and eviction notices, like refugee camps and famine zones, like neighborhoods where children learn early that food is not guaranteed. The gingerbread house didn't vanish either. It adapted. Now it looks like false promises, like predators offering safety, like systems that feed just enough to keep you dependent. It still shines, it still smells sweet, and it still kills. And the witches, they are not always old women in forests. Sometimes they are institutions, sometimes traffickers, sometimes corporations, sometimes just people who figured out how to profit from desperation. The cage still exists. The oven still exists. They just wear cleaner masks. And children are still being abandoned, not always physically, sometimes emotionally, sometimes economically, sometimes morally. Parents still do the math, rent or food, medicine or heat. One child's future or another's survival. The numbers are still cruel, and people still make impossible choices. That is why this story survives, not because it is shocking, but because it is true. Hansel and Gretel are not fairy tale characters. They are archetypes. They are every child who learned too early that the world does not bend for innocence. Every child who had to be clever to live. Every child who survived something they were never meant to survive. And Gretel is the part of us that understands a truth we don't like to admit. Sometimes survival requires violence. Sometimes there is no clean escape. Sometimes you don't get to stay innocent. And you live anyway. The story ends where it began, with survival, not redemption, not justice, not comfort, just survival. The brothers Grimm did not collect this tale to scare children. They collected it because people were already scared, because fear needed a shape, because trauma needed a language, because pretending the world was kind had never saved anyone. So when the sanitized version tells you "and they lived happily ever after," understand what it really means. It means they lived, they carried what they did, they carried what was done to them. They learned that hunger changes people, that love can fail, that morality bends, and that survival is not free. So now, as this story finally loosens its grip on you, ask yourself one last thing. If you were lost in the forest, if you were starving, if a house made of food appeared in the darkness, would you walk toward it? And if you had to choose between innocence and survival, what would you burn? Sleep now. Dream of white pebbles shining in the dark, of breadcrumbs that vanish before dawn, of ovens that remember every scream. Dream of children who survived. Because somewhere right now, another child is walking into the forest, and this story is still being told.